Hi, my name is Kelvin Jones. I am a certified prosthetist and orthotist here with the Prosthetic and Orthotic Institute. Today we're going to spend some time speaking and educating our patients on proper donning and doffing of two of the suspension mechanisms that different prostheses have. Today we're going to cover the proper donning of a pin locking suspension mechanism in a prosthesis, and then our second part of the video we're going to cover proper donning and doffing of a vacuum or suction suspension mechanism of a prosthesis. Our first patient here is Mr. Kenny Desio, and Kenny has offered to volunteer for us today, and as you can see I'm taking his prosthetic liner. This is one of the first things that we educate our folks on, is rolling the prosthetic liner out completely. We want to ensure that there is no residual air trapped into the bottom of the prosthetic gel liner. We push it out all the way, push it flush against the residual limb. We then have the liner rolled onto the residual limb, and then we also have our patients in our teaching learn how to actually roll the liner on themselves. And this is important because, again, this is repetition for our patients. As you can see here, we want to ensure that the pin is parallel to the residual limb, period, as that's being shown. We're also checking to make sure that the liner is lined up correctly. Some of your liners will have the same thickness throughout. Some liners are thicker in gel on the anterior aspect or where the patella knee is. As you can see, he's checked his flexion angle here of the residual limb. Now we're going to don the prosthesis, and as he's donning his prosthesis for the first time, the pin actually engages into a distal prosthetic lock. As you can see here, we have gapping on the medial and lateral aspect, and we have pressed the residual limb down into the lock. We want to ensure that before we're up and walking, if the prosthetic residual limb is engaged quickly, then we know that we may need to add a sock. Socks are important because, again, the prosthesis is fabricated anatomically of where the limb is, and as the limb atrophies, all patients will eventually have to wear or add prosthetic socks. These come in 1-ply, 3-ply, 5-ply typically, especially for pin locking mechanism suspension system. We want to ensure that the sock has cleared the pin and that in fact there is no possibility of it engaging over the pin before it hits the suspension mechanism. And we have pushed the residual limb down into the prosthetic lock again. He set his prosthesis at a 45-degree angle. And once the residual limb is engaged inside the prosthetic lock, we then want to hear that audible click. And the click will allow us to know that in fact the residual limb is locked into the prosthetic lock. Again, we check the gapping on lateral medial, and we see that it's probably wise to add another sock here. Again, if the residual limb is going straight to the bottom of the prosthetic socket before we've added socks, or even after we've added socks, that is a cue to add more socks to ensure that we get an intimate fit of the residual limb inside of the prosthesis. As you can see here, I've shown you the sock. If it is over the distal pin, if this is engaged into the lock, then it is going to make it very difficult, almost impossible, to get your prosthesis off. No concerns here. If this does happen, and it typically does, we could see you in the office to remove this prosthesis. As you can see here, we've redonned the prosthesis, and Kenny is wearing two prosthetic socks. Looks like to be a 3-5 ply and a 5-ply. Upon donning this, I'm going to take the opportunity here to show you this particular ankle that he is wearing, and this is a hydraulic ankle, and this ankle offers dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. The positive of this is that it's really good ground compliance, and on uneven terrain and hills and declines and inclines, this allows you to accommodate those terrains and really helps to remove the amount of stress placed on the residual limb. So this is typical of a K2 community ambulator, which is someone who is a community ambulator and is able to get out and perform their activities of daily living. As Kenny is donning his diabetic shoes here, we like to ensure that shoes, when they're fitting over the prosthetic foot, are adequately fitting over the prosthetic foot tightly. We do not want the shoes to be loose. So as Kenny is standing here, he is reinforcing the fact that his prosthesis has been engaged. Our second video here is going to show different type of suspension. This type of suspension is a vacuum suspension. And as you can see, Kenny is putting a lotion material on the outside of his prosthetic liner. These are very popular as suction and vacuum systems can provide maximum proprioceptive feedback for our patients, which really helps them to have a feeling of the prosthesis as part of their residual limb and part of their body. It really prevents any pistoning that can happen inside of a prosthesis. As Kenny is donning his liner here, again, we want to ensure that there's no air pockets trapped inside of the prosthetic liner. He simply is just taking a washcloth and removing any residual lotion that is left on the prosthesis liner. Kenny is putting a barrier wick on. This is simply just a sheath hose over his prosthetic liner. He is then adding a partial sock or a half sock on the residual limb. This ensures that he has an intimate fit in the bottom of his prosthetic socket. As you can see, he is now engaging his suspension sleeve, and upon rolling that up on the residual limb, it creates a seal, and a vacuum is then engaged, and the vacuum will increase anywhere from 5 to 20 psi. This allows the patient to get adequate suspension of his prosthesis. So as you can see here in our educational standpoint, we have talked about vacuum systems today, and we've also talked about pin locking mechanisms, and these are two of the most popular suspension mechanisms that we use in prosthetics for prosthesis. I hope you have a good day, and we look forward to speaking to you again on further educational series. Thank you.